So this is the book I'm reading. And when I purchased this book, three things. The cowboy was in the title of the book. There was a cowboy picture on the front of the book. And automatically I saw one of my favorite authors' names, Maisie Yates. And that I didn't even read the back to see what it was about, which was unusual because usually I read the back before I make the decision. It makes it to my cart. What a surprise. 4 authors, 4 different stories, 4 different seasons, and the first story was Spring by author Caitlin Cruz. And before we start in on reading pages from the book, I want to read the back of the book to you in this very first book review. Remember, we're going to be doing 4 of these from the same book, okay? But I want to read you the back, and this will probably be the only time I read the back to you, so listen up. Discover the power of family. In this uplifting quartet by the New York Times bestseller author Maisie Yates, USA Today bestselling author Caitlin Cruz, Nicole Helm, and Jackie Ashton, June Gable left each of her 4 granddaughters a handwritten bequest to spend a season at her beloved farmhouse in Jasper Creek, Oregon, before they sell it. These cousins were once as close as sisters, but time and family betrayals have pushed them apart. In spring, polished city girl Kira must find her country roots and reconnect with an old flame. In the summer, tough tomboy JJ needs to tap into her softer side while helping a single dad with his daughters. Cheerful dreamer Lila has to help coordinate the town craft fair in autumn under the stern eye of the handsome cowboy she loved as a girl. And as winter falls, headstrong independent Bella must learn to ask for help from one man she believes she can never have. The 4 cousins will have to confront secrets from the past, deal with old wounds they'd rather hide, and tangle with the hard-headed cowboys before they have to find love, healing, and the true meaning of family. Okay. Now I'm going to read some of this stuff here to you. Okay, they show a picture of spring, and this is Caitlin Cruz that we start off with. And the thank you, I always like to read those. To Nicole, Maisie, Jackie for making this so magical, to Flo for believing in magic, and for all the Grandma Junes everywhere who love so hard and so true. It stays long after they go. I love you, Grandma and Nanny, and still and always. Spring. Now this is the letter that the grandma left this girl, Kira. It's a very strange thing to get old, to know that eventually the world will go on without you, to see clearly your successes and your mistakes, and still not know what you could have done about either. You, my poised girl, so full of elegance and surely in yourself, have filled my life with happiness since the day you were born. Summers with you always reminded me how much the world had to offer, to my 4 wonderful, vibrant, different girls. I missed you, and though I know you won't admit it to yourself, you've missed your heart as well. It's all good and well to see what the world has to offer, but sometimes only home can bring you your true change. I have many things to ask of you this spring, and I doubt that you'll be surprised. I've asked you to spend this particular season at home, tending to the land and the cattle. I know you'll appreciate watching the season bloom around you, and find a way to do that for yourself. First, you'll need to face your past and make peace with your choices, past ones and the ones that await you in your future. Let my spirit guide you in all that you do, and let this house take care of you as it always has cared for me. Love always, Grandma June. So Kara comes home after leaving for college to her late grandma's place. I don't want to ruin the parts between her and her ex-fiancé, but it does go to show you that when you really love someone, it simply just doesn't go away or fade away. Sure, you can forget or try to, but if it's meant to be, then love will surely find a way. To find out what I mean, read Spring by Caitlin Cruz. Her chapter gets an 8.5 rating. I really enjoyed the moments when you feel like the influence of Grandma June happens a lot in this book. Let's see if I have enough time to read a bit to you before I decide to call it a night. Okay, Kira Long was finally ready to face her ghosts. That was what she told herself as she climbed out of the car, driven down from Seattle, packed full of her worldly possessions, which told a sad, small tale about her past 5 years. Faced the house that stood for over 100 years and been only the safe space in her life for what felt much longer than that. Grandma June's farmhouse, Kira's favorite place on earth. And for the first time in her life without Grandma June, whom they lost over 3 weeks ago. Kira had promised herself she wouldn't cry, so she looked at the old farmhouse instead. It stood stout and settled against the moody March afternoon, so no matter its weathered paint and signs of age and care, Kira chose to take that as a sign. She left Seattle before dawn and driven all the way down the interstate, then over familiar rolling hills on autopilot, skirting her hometown of Jasper Creek, Oregon, and taking the country roads she knew so well. A wave of sadness washed over her, but she concentrated fiercely on the dogwood tree that stood in the front of the house. In a matter of weeks, the buds she saw fighting for the purchase on its branches would bust into color, a glorious pink that made Kira feel light and happy every time she saw it. It didn't matter, it was in bloom it would be. We're going to skip down a little bit, so y'all know she's made a safe journey there. She has lots of memories. There's one part I don't want to miss, so I'm trying to make sure I don't miss it for y'all. She goes into the room, and she ran her hand over the quilt her grandmother had made by hand. Then looked out the window to where the trees were starting to look like they might snap out of their winter slumber and make us run at spring. Kira felt much the same. This is page 16. Sorry, I haven't told you what pages I've been reading. And Grandma June always knew how Kara gotten up the nerve to apply for college and actually go when her parents had only laughed at the notion. They pressured Kara to stay at Jasper Creek, marry the man who happened to be a member of the prominent West family, who hated her father, and settle down right out of high school despite her scholarship because it would benefit them, because her parents were always thinking about themselves. And as for the rest of the small town of Jasper Creek, the undercurrent to every conversation back when they always seemed to be the daughter of that known liar Michael Long, certainly wouldn't expect to do any better than marrying a West, now could she? Grandma June had shrugged her shoulders and told Kira that she wasn't aware love was a Black Friday sale, available for only one day and gone forever the next. If it's love, Grandma said, it will find its way. And for 4 years later, Grandma June sat next to her and gathered her in a hug when Kira had broken her own heart into pieces because she knew it was the right thing to do, no matter how much it hurt. I saw him she's now talking out loud, as if she was right there. You'd be proud of me, Kara said out loud, and it was already easier for the first time. It felt perfectly normal to talk quiet rooms filled with her grandmother's things. I saw him at the funeral, and you were right all along. I built it up in my head, and I felt some stuff, but it was fine. Grandma always had a way that told Kara that there was no need to avoid her past. The past had a way of catching up to a person harder if they tried to run, and that Remy West, who had been Kira's first love, her first everything, from first kiss to marriage proposal to heartbreak, was no reason to avoid coming home to Jasper Creek. And maybe Kira had been using him as an excuse at first. She graduated from college, turned Remy down the same weekend, and she knew that no one in this town would ever likely understand that decision. But she'd done it, and the past 5 years hadn't been easy, but they'd been rewarding. She carved out a life in Seattle. She had her own savings, a retirement plan that she had no debt. She had quit her job so she could live with her grandmother's farmhouse for a whole spring without risking anything. For a girl who had been raised by a con man father and a mother whose entire life was indulging his every whim and scheme, it was nothing short of a miracle. Kira pressed her palm against the faded quilt and let the emotion roll over her. It was still so hard to believe that she was never going to hear grandmother's voice again. The particular way Grandma June said her name, the magic of her chortle when she was trying not to laugh, the cards she said on every birthday without fail, that had Kira smiling, and the moment she saw the distinctive handwriting on the envelope, not to mention her full name, Miss Kira Catherine Long, that envelope always read. I'm going to skip over a little bit here. And above all, what should she do? What could she do about Remy? Remy is the ex-fiancé. Thinking his name didn't hurt the way it used to, and she worked hard to achieve that, so hard that she almost convinced herself she wouldn't react to seeing him at all. Then she walked into her grandma's funeral, and there he was. Ouch. When they were younger, the age gap between them had been only one of the reasons that they were a community scandal, but these days, the handful of years seemed like nothing. Remy looked as if one of those years had weathered him, but that only made him look better, which should have been impossible. She and Remy had stared at each other in the foyer of the church. Kira had planned it all out in her head and on the flight down. She'd be mature, obviously gracious, quietly aware of their past without being nostalgic, especially with the whole town looking on and no doubt muttering about their uppity long girl who thought she could do better than the steady, hard-working West boy who so foolishly defied his family for her. But there was no need for any of that. Remy had gazed at her, unsmiling. The eyes that she remembered as hazel streaked with gold had looked dark and distinctly unfriendly. He nodded his head, acknowledging her, and she'd been paralyzed. She hadn't been able to smile, hadn't been able to say anything, and certainly nothing gracious. She hadn't even been able to offer her own polite nod in return. She only stared back at him, frozen, while her stomach flipped and took its time sinking down before the floor. She really hadn't expected it to affect her so much all these years later. She hadn't expected him to cause that same wallop that she remembered so well. Sure, everyone had moved on, she told herself on the plane. That's what happened when people broke up. They moved on, they grew, they changed, and they left behind all that. Kira hadn't expected Remy to greet her with a wide smile and a big old hug the way he would have back in the day, but she would have been prepared for the extent of his, well, she couldn't really call it coldness. He simply hadn't been the Remy she knew. He looked older and harder, man. Out in the dark on the front porch of the farmhouse, on the spring night was turning downright cold. Kira found herself rubbing at her heart as if she could make those jangly old feelings dissipate. That was the thing with hard choices. Kara had made hers, and she couldn't regret them, not when she'd done things she knew she couldn't, and wouldn't have done if she would have stayed just to be with Remy. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. Okay. So she goes to sleep in the small bedroom, but she shoots straight up in bed, then scrambled back against the iron rails of the headboard as she saw a figure of a man, and the next second she recognized him. She suspected she would always recognize him, any time, anywhere. Remy. She was plastered against the head of the bed. Her pulse was galloping around inside her. She blinked, trying to make sense of the fact that Remy West was the man who cast a shadow over her most of her life, and was now casting the same shadow here in the upstairs bedroom at Grandma June's house. And Kira had to glance at the clock on the bedside table twice to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. 4:30 in the morning. He was dressed like a cowboy. That he was. He worked his father's ranch since before he could walk. And now he walked, low, loose, like he was not only prepared for eventually the land that could throw at him, but more than capable of handling it. And if she thought he looked grim at the funeral, it was worse closer up. Or better, a sly part of her suggested. He looked carved from the impeccable stone, and yet that did very little to take away the fact that Remington Eli West was the most beautiful man Kira had ever seen. When she was a teenager or any time since, he was tall, and folks were always tempted to call him lanky, but he had too much rangy muscle for that. He was standing in a glare of the overhead light in a cowboy hat, flannel shirt, jeans, and boots, and simply mouth-watering. When they were younger, he had focused in the intensity Kara had found overwhelming as it was thrilling. He brought that into everything he did. That boy isn't dating just to date, Grandma had told Kira at the time and beginning of it all. He'd been in his early 20s then, and there had been absolutely no doubt in anyone's mind that he was already a man. All these years later, even less doubt in Kira's. "What are you doing here?" she asked, while her heart was still performing calisthenics in her chest. From the fear and the shock, she told herself, that was all. His eyes glistened with something that looked and felt a lot like a temper. His jaw might have well been granite. "Are you wearing my t-shirt?" he demanded. Kira was definitely not prepared for this voice, that voice. Low, raspy, dark, nothing short of delicious, and she could feel herself responding the way he taught her all those years ago, readying herself, flushing and melting. She yanked the nearest quilt up to her chin. "I have no idea. It's just the shirt I sleep in." Which was a lie. The green and gold duck that had once been bright on the background was now fading. And she knew exactly whose t-shirt it was. She could tell from the way the muscle t-shirt was hard in his jaw, and Remy did too. "It's great to see you again, Remy," she said, the way she practiced before the funeral 3 weeks ago. She'd been half sick with grief, weak, but having gotten the first sighting out of the way, there was no need to wallow in it any further. "I mean that, though. I think I would mean it more if it weren't in the middle of the night." He stared at her for a long. She almost started squirming, almost. She could certainly feel her cheeks get hot. Remy kept studying her as if she got some kind of science experiment, possibly one that had gone horribly awry. "This isn't the middle of the night," he said, after what felt like a very uncomfortable lifetime. "It's the beginning of the working day. Why are you still in bed?" "The working day?" Kira was always more awake now, thanks to the minor heart attack. Her hair was probably matted to the side of her head, which was certainly not how she envisioned running into her ex again. She told herself not to be shallow, but when she rubbed her hands over her face, she attempted to wake up, smoothed her hair down. "I got a letter from your grandma," Remy told her shortly. "She told me you were coming to deal with the cattle." "Guess what, Princess? We deal with the cattle in the middle of the night, every night." Kira managed not to flinch. Remy had sometimes called her Princess back when. He also called her Princess because she wasn't one. He called her Princess with a laugh, as he taught her how to handle the herd the way they did on his father's ranch. He called her Princess because she was his. And she didn't have to know a single thing that happened to him over the past 5 years to understand that he was not using that word as a term of endearment tonight. "I also got a letter, but it didn't mention that we would be—" She cleared her throat. "Mine said I was supposed to be handling the cows." "Yeah, you remember how?" Kira waved a vague hand. She decided to dive straight into what she called here to do, the same way she jumped into her new life in Seattle. A comparison she thought better making out loud. "Grandma June always had hired hands to help out as needed. I've been doing a lot of research." Research. The flat line of his mouth curved into a little, but she was pretty sure it was deseration, not amusement, and coming from him, it left her breathless and hollow. "Good thing you have that college degree, then. You can read all those books. Or," Remy jerked his chin toward the door, and his dark eyes glittering like he hated her, a possibility Kira really hadn't allowed herself to consider, "you can get out there, out of that bed, come outside and do some real work for a change. Your choice." So I'm going to leave you wondering, do these two end up eventually getting back together? Does love conquer all? It always does in books. But for you to read how it happens, read the first part of this amazing book, A Cowboy for All Seasons. And this season just happens to be by Caitlin Cruz, Spring. I hope to share summer with you tomorrow night. God bless, stay safe, stay well, and as always in 2021, what I want for you and everyone watching is to be safe, healthy, and well. Make sure that you're doing something to make this world a better place. Make sure that you are going out of your way to help someone. Make sure that you don't expect anything from the help that you give someone. And I wish all of you health, happiness, and hope, as well as faith, hope, and love. Because the greatest is love, not only in the bank, but in your heart. Because that's something that money can't buy. I want you all to keep your social distance. Wash your hands when you can't wash your hands. Use your hand sanitizer. God bless. I'm going to go take a Benadryl and call it a night.